It turns out that what I really like to do in medium-heavy worker placement games is play like an HR director. This was true to a certain extent in Food Chain Magnate. This was true to a certain extent in Carnegie. This was especially true in Anachrony, and I really, really like doing it in Oak.
It's so true. There's so many levels, like you said, because you have to manage it. There's so many levels. When you want to place a worker, you got to see, is it a fancy worker?
A bedazzled worker.
A bedazzled worker. Am I going to put it into a fancy spot? Is there going to be room for this fancy worker to come back to his fancy house? All of these things. Is the spot I want to go to, open? Do I have to spend more druids to go there? Do I have enough resources to do that spot? All of these things lead to great, decision spaces.
And Oak elevates a lot of things that at worst can be tired in other Euro games. One of them being worker placement and the way that it's married with hard blocking and card management, as well as being able to have room for them and bedazzling them. On top of that, you have recipe fulfillment, which every other Euro seems to have. And they really gave the game of Oak a shot in the arm in terms of variety, in terms of the different potions that can come out. Many of them involve extra components, special bedazzlements, fancy hats. And it doesn't feel like just a tacked-on way or a lazy way to turn some resources into other resources, or worse yet, just the end way of turning resources into victory points. It's more variety, always engaging, always lots of trade-offs, and quite frankly, lots of cool effects. Drowning in toys is something that I never get tired of, and this certainly isn't, Spirit Island, nor is it trying to be, but nonetheless, there's lots of cool things to acquire and to help advance your strategy in a game of Oak.
So it's not about just bedazzling your druids. They all are special. You can put, like this one here, you can put a loot on it, and it will get its own little spot for story time, and that sort of funnels into another mechanism we'll talk about later, about how many huts and how many creatures you can have, because it tacks on to the left hand side as opposed to the right hand side. You have ones that can go in spaces where other druids are. You have all of these, there's like 6 different druids, and they all have their own little either antlers or a potion bag or all sorts of interesting things they can do.
Seldom is it a case, again, that a sort of medium heavy Euro can appeal to you primarily by its toyetic appeal. And one of the first things that appealed to both of us, quite frankly, in terms of Oak, was you get to put these little toys on your little druids. And the best part is, this applies to both the retail and the Kickstarter versions of Oak.
I was going to say, at first it was the only reason I saw it. It was like pledge. Just seeing that you get to dress up your druids, it just seemed like something different. I know that Tiny Epic has done it before, but this one seemed like there was a little bit of an actual game behind it.
Yes, absolutely that. One of the things that helps focus Oak, though, and it's not all randomness in terms of, new creatures to play with and new toys to play with and new artifacts and this, that, and the other, is that it all tends to be grounded by the tracks. And normally I'm not a huge fan of tracks in Euros, but here they're sufficiently prominent both physically and conceptually. They're one of the key ways in which you're going to get the big point bonuses. And so you have to keep that in mind. Even, I think, starting from the first round, after the first couple plays, of course, you really want to have your eyes on the prize in terms of which tracks you're going to max out. And for what it's worth, this also feeds into resource management because it ties up some of your workers in another interesting way.
Yeah, it ties into the setup as well, because everyone has their own player board and they're all completely different. And most of the player boards, pretty well all of them, also sort of lean towards a certain branch. So you can say, I'm going to go for that branch, I can max it out. You can also sort of try to rocket up a branch so the person is, very solo into that one thing, you can maybe close that off. Because at the end of the entire round, if someone's at the end, then that branch closes off and it's done.
The one misgiving that I have about Oak, the chief gameplay misgiving, actually, is that one of the branches does seem better than the others, at least in the playings that I've had. It's the one that just gives you 1 point for every 5 points you have. Normally, the other ones, you have to work for something. You have to focus, you have to specialize. I need to get a lot of huts, I need to get a lot of creatures, what have you. And that interfaces with a whole bunch of other throughput limits. Not in a handcuffy way, as Walker would say, but in an engaging way. The one that just gives you points for more points, don't need to work towards a combo, don't need to plan towards it, it'll be good, just get there before other people get there.
And so what you're doing, because we haven't really explained how the game sort of flows, is that you have to pair up one of these druids with a card, and you can see here that there's 3 different actions that you can do, and there's a bottom action. So with the 3 first actions, you need to pair it with the druid in the 3 spaces on the board, and then you get to do that action after you pay the resources. Or you can do the one on the bottom, which is move up the tree.
And for that, you don't need a worker at all, at least not in the conventional sense. It gets a little nuanced.
Yeah, and then there are spaces on your actual player board, and there's spaces on the board itself, and you can get some artifacts that will have spaces, and some of them are fancy, like I said before, and only an upgraded druid can go there. So lots of things that you have to worry about.
And one of the best challenges, at least as far as I'm concerned, is looking down at round 2 or 3 and realizing that your workforce is miscalibrated for what you need them to do. Sometimes you desperately need them all to hit board spaces, but then you start running out of cards. Sometimes you desperately want them to hit spaces on your own home board, but then you realize that you don't have enough artifacts or enough toys to really take advantage of the excess workers that you have. In a lot of other worker placement games, especially the early ones, getting more workers was the dominant strategy. But Oak layers onto that a number of interesting interconnected mechanisms, such that, again, it really is about managing a workforce, evolving a workforce, reacting to your situational needs, and that is one of the aspects that I find most enjoyable about Oak.
Yeah, and the best way to get ingredients for these potions that we're talking about is to pass. So you might want to even weigh, well, is this important enough for me to take another turn, or do I want to start passing now and start getting a lot more resources to brew potions next turn? And same thing with managing resources here. You only get, in the income phase, you're only going to get 3 of each. That is pretty well, through very small other circumstances, all the resources you're going to get. And some of the actions cost 6. So am I going to pass now, get the advantage of getting more potions, and be able to build up enough resources to do those bigger actions that I want to do?
I think you're right to highlight that, because despite the fact that, as we've been emphasizing, there are lots of different details and lots of different levers to pull in a game of Oak, but it knows when to pull back and when to simplify. And I think in terms of its attitude towards core resource management, that's really where it's exemplified, because you don't really build an engine. You're not really building up a whole bunch of economic bonuses. When it comes time to take income, everyone gets exactly the same amount, with very rare exceptions. They're like, well, I get +1 from this, and +2 from this, +1 from this other thing. And so you don't feel like an accountant. You actually feel like you're playing the game.
Yeah, the majority of the bonuses you're going to get from the artifacts and the creatures are mostly a discount. It's like you're not going to get, so you can cruise through like the after round stuff. There's not a lot of stuff tacked on, which I love how they did that. Same thing with the end game scoring. There's nothing there, so you quickly do your upkeep and paperwork during each round, and then you're on to the next turn. Then you're right back into it. You just nothing, bonuses to your stuff. That's one thing maybe might be a little difficult. You have to remember that I did get a discount for doing these feather actions, or this particular thing I don't have to pay all the resources for. So maybe for, intro gamers, there might be a lot, and there's a huge wall to start the game, because there's a 50 card creature deck that they're all completely different, all have different abilities. There are a bunch of artifacts that all have, sometimes the iconography is very, very good, but some of the timing issues on these artifacts of like sort of, do I get to look in the bag or not look in the bag, or is it going to be random or not random? Sometimes you have to look these up just to make sure you're doing it right. And then like I said, all the player boards have different abilities as well. So, and all the druids have special abilities. So lots to load on at the front, but overall, it needs to play. Once you get that first turn in, then you're going.
As far as medium-heavy Euros go, I don't think Oak is particularly egregious in terms of either the iconography or in terms of the cognitive load of figuring out what these various things do. As you say, by the time the second and third rounds of your first game pass by, you know what you're doing. And I think that really exemplifies the sort of cleverness and attention to detail of a lot of the design. Oak knows when to be complicated and when to pull back. It knows where to focus, and it knows where to sprawl. And as a consequence, it doesn't feel like a lot of other really tedious economic management games, nor does it feel like a point salad game, although superficially it kind of is, because most of the actions you do are going to get you 2 to 4 points. And I really think it's because of this strong editorial focus on knowing where to put its energies, and by extension, where your cognitive energies are going to go as a player. And all told, this is a very, very assured design. I'm quite frankly shocked that this is by a first-time published designer.
Yeah.
Wim Hoosens has done a marvelous job of avoiding a lot of the pitfalls and really emphasizing some of the quality elements in other Euros. I can't wait to see what else he puts out.
Yeah, I just want to get back to one thing, because I said I was going to talk about later, and that's the limits they put you at the beginning of the game. At the beginning of the game, you can only have one creature and one hovel or shrine.
I call them hovels.
Shrines, where you
druids need to clean themselves better. That's all I'm going to say.
They get tired. They do all this magic stuff. They got to come rest. So
It's
you have
true.
to have a place to put them. But they do a great job of there are lots of actions that you could do to increase this limit as it goes across. And like I said, you can do your Bard Hut, that gives you another spot, but they also let you like sort of pay resources at any time. So it's not only these things, I wish I had done this, or I wish I, could fit this action. And it's like, just spend some resources and you get to move along, and it's at any time. Love that they did that.
Yeah, great balance of flexibility. And it's that balance that you see almost throughout a game of Oak. My one misgiving is that, again, I wish the tracks were variable. It's the one aspect of a game of Oak that is not variable. Almost everything else is and will change from game to game. So the one aspect of repetition, it doesn't get repetitive, but it's the one aspect of repetition is those different tracks. And as I say, one of the tracks, the point for every 5 points you've already got, I'd actually be happier if that just weren't in the game entirely. But other than that, Oak is absolutely wonderful.
And like you said before, it's a game like Capital Lux 2, where they have all these modules off to the side, and depending on what of the three main potions you have, you're going to bring in these extra game components that really mixes up the game.
Absolutely.
I thought that was very, very cool. I'd play Oak anytime.
Marvelous game, one of the best Euros of the past few years.